very quickly, just on the ordinal side, before talking about the JPEGs, you can have, this is the first Satoshi that was mined in a given block. That's maybe uncommon, right? And then you can have, I have the first Satoshi that came after a difficulty adjustment. That only happens once every 2 weeks. That's more rare. And then you can have the first Satoshi after a new halving.
Yeah.
Right. And
that's like people who collect banknotes with serial numbers on.
Yeah. And I was listening to a podcast, Bitcoin.review with Reindahl and Rodolfo, MBK, and Casey. And they were talking about people are natural. A lot of people in Bitcoin are just natural collectors. So maybe you want to collect some Satoshis from every single exchange hack, right? Quadriga, Bitfinex, you can start, since you know where in the hack happened, you know all of the individual serial numbers that were involved in that hack. Maybe you want to collect that, right? Maybe I want to collect a couple Satoshis for my wedding day, right? You can find little fun things that you can use to commemorate occasions, and you're applying this new shared hallucination to be able to collect, different Satoshis that have value to you uniquely.
Yeah, so I bought a print by a Russian artist. It's limited 50. I knew the distributor, so I asked for number 1 because number 1 is always the most popular. It's always worth more.
Right. Yeah.
Or it's like first edition prints of books.
But all the prints are the same, but
exactly
this one's the first serial number.
Exactly. Yeah, it literally says 1 of 50 on it.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's, it's arbitrary because the art is identical. It's the serial number on top of it that people assign more value to.
Okay, so you could argue there's a net negative if people start hoarding Satoshis based on numbers because we want this to be money.
I mean, I think I would reject the term hoarding. What are you when you're hodling Bitcoin?
You are holding to spend in the future.
Yeah.
To make use of it. But when you're hoarding, you may never make use of it.
Well, I think there's a couple of things I have thoughts on that. So one, I think holding it and then maybe eventually passing it down to your child or selling it off in a collection later, it may not be in the literal sense of I'm going to use this to go buy, groceries, but it's still legitimate use case in that, it's my property, I'm going to hold on to it. And by restricting more people hold on to it, this is the whole idea around you want to hold it and then there's less available supply and the price goes up. So this is part of, hoarding as a term. That's part of the whole number go up thesis.
Yeah. But I'm not a huge number go up thesis guy anymore anyway, because I'm my view on Bitcoin, when I talk about Bitcoin, I did a presentation down at the football club the other day, and I was like, Bitcoin is the best money that's ever existed.
Yeah.
So therefore, there's a trade-off here between, does this make this the best form of money, or are there some selfish incentives that could slightly make it less great money? And I think giving people a reason to hold certain Satoshis and hoard them, and I will use the term hoard them, I think is a selfish decision. It's a personal decision, selfish, that works against Bitcoin being the best form of money.
Well, I think the desire to hold Bitcoin helps with it being the best form of money, because this is like Gresham's law. If I have bad money, I want to get rid of the bad money and hold on to the good money.
Yeah, but the reason to hold it is different now. It's because some superficial human reason, but it's not about best money.
But when people collect special coins, does that ruin the dollar as a form of money?
The dollar's already ruined. It's shit money already.
But that's not the point. I'm saying
But it is the point, because what I'm saying is we're trying to create the best form of money.
So this is actually, I think, an even further zoom out. Bitcoin exists.
Mm-hmm.
Any sort of moralistic lens of perspectives of what it should be doing is a conversation, but Bitcoin works as this anarchic system where there's no one in control and everyone gets to use it however they want. And if people can't do that, the project fails.
No, I completely agree. But what I'm just saying is, my empathetic side is,
sure,
are we trying to create the best form of money that ever existed? Do we make it less good by giving people to hoard it, which has nothing to do with money and purely to do with superficial human reasons?
I don't think that's a bad thing in that, people are going to use it for whatever they want to need to. And I think this is a very important point that I think the stuff that's going on with Ordinals right now, whether it's a flash in the pan and no one's caring. Well, one, I have some thoughts on that. Bitcoin, Ordinals in general, I think, it's almost a change of the guard from a narrative element in Bitcoin. Bitcoin will still be sound money. It will be still something we all talk about as a good, strong form of money. But Ordinals is changing the narrative of what it is to be using Bitcoin and what is Bitcoin for. And I think this is something that we're seeing kind of a sea change of narrative right now on how people use and think about Bitcoin. We're
seeing a debate.
I think the
don't think it's a narrative.
Settled.
I don't think it's settled yet. As somebody, because I can step outside of this as somebody who doesn't give a fuck either way.
Yep.
And I do not think this is a settled debate. And the reason I don't think it's settled is I put a question out yesterday on Twitter about it, and the same one out on Nostra, and I got very different replies on Nostra.
Yep.
On Twitter, it was very much like, yeah, this is great, with some negatives. On Nostra, it's very much, this is fucking stupid, with a few positives. Well, so it's settled. It's far from settled.
I think this is what I mean, though, by a narrative change, because the people that are there are, classes of 2017, 2018, maybe even earlier too. I mean, there's a lot of older, like old school Bitcoiners on there, but they have this sound money primacy thesis about what Bitcoin is supposed to be. And the reality is that the people that are using it now for inscriptions and JPEGs and all the silly collecting stuff, they're part of Bitcoin. They're using Bitcoin, they're following the rules of Bitcoin, and they're here to stay.
But Bitcoin evolves and changes.
Yeah, exists. Yeah, I think this is part of Bitcoin's evolution. And we have to kind of, from my perspective, I actually personally would love to have smaller blocks. I'm never going to have smaller blocks, but that's just my wish list. We now live in a world, though, where these are valid Bitcoin transactions. We can't censor or remove them. They're following the rules of Bitcoin, so we have to live to exist with them. So rather than seething and coping, just accepting that this is the current state of play, we had a block size increase during SegWit in 2017, and then BIP 342, which was part of Taproot, removed the script size limit, which is why you're getting these very large transactions now that are being embedded. And you can't undo those changes easily. So we have to accept this is the new state of play. And this is what I mean by a narrative shift, because people, like you said, like people are having fun with Bitcoin, playing around with it, and it has nothing to do with money. People are touching and playing with Bitcoin now with no care for the digital gold thesis. They have no care for, sound money as a narrative. They're having fun doing art collections and JPEGs and being irreverent and making silly memes on the blockchain. And it's just like, they're here now. You can't kick them out. And I think this is part of that narrative seat change.
Well, 2 points on that. Firstly, there are people who are definitely pro NFTs on Bitcoin who are definitely mocking the Ethereum people for NFTs a year ago. Yeah. People have flipped their perspective on this for a selfish reason because they think it's good for them, right? And then they mock people. It's a hypocritical position to take, fine, but it's a hypocritical position to take. I value their opinion less because I think their actions are more based around personal number go up,
sure,
than wider adoption and benefit of sound money for a wider community. Like yesterday, we were making our show about, we're doing a new 3-part beginner's guide, really simple one.
Yep.
And one of the questions we said is we talked about why Bitcoin's good money and why it benefits people.
Yep.
Well, let's look how it's maybe different for people in the developing world because they have a different use case.
Sure.
And so, I'm beyond the number go up now. I don't care anymore. I care about the widespread adoption of Bitcoin that benefits people's lives. Mm-hmm. So the point I'm trying to get to is I'm not trying to be combative. I've not taken a position. I would argue whatever side you take, I would argue the other side. So if we're trying to create sound money, if we're trying to create the best form of money, I have to at least kind of push back against this. And when you say it's here and we have to accept it, is that 100% true? This cannot be undone. There's no technical way to undo this.
I mean, you can fork off.
No. Can it be done without a hard fork?
It can be done with a hard fork. What you would need to do, though,
without
is
a hard fork.
Without one. You'd have to have all of the miners agree not to touch this stuff anymore. But the miners are now getting transaction fees.
Well, so you don't always just have to have the miners. No 2x proved that.
Sure.
Okay. And what I'm saying is, therefore, the point I'm trying to get to is I'm not trying to argue against you and have the debate right now. What I'm trying to say, the debate isn't settled. The debate might go on. If it got to the point, it may get to a point where there is a debate about, actually, is this good for Bitcoin or not? And if it isn't, is there a way of getting rid of it? And will people get rid of it?
Yeah. So the way you could get rid of it is if you had a bunch of users come together, do a user-activated soft fork and say, we are going to censor and not acknowledge the existence of any ordinal inscriptions.
Which we can fully...
It could be done.
Which is exactly what happened during the block size wars and largely contributed to the failure of the hard fork.
Yeah. But again, we should walk through this for a moment then. Okay. You have a coalition of people who want to ban this. One, I was talking to Pete Rizzo about this. He calls this the degens paradox.
I think we have to be careful with language here, because you're saying ban this, and that it's instantly like a pejorative, when actually it's I think some people out there want the best, soundest form of money.
Sure.
And they think this is a net negative.
I understand and sympathize with the idea of that.
Yeah.
But again, okay, so how are you going to do it? If you're not going to have, if you want to have the users put forward a change, your option is to fork this behavior out of the network, which means I will not recognize any ordinal transaction at all. That then means, though, you would have the moment a block was mined that had ordinals, and you pick a block height saying at block height 1,000,000, we're going to no longer do ordinals. If that block has ordinals in it, you have a fork in the network now. You have people who decided to break off from the network and not recognize ordinals exist, and you have people who decided that they wanted to stay. And now you have a fork, just like you had with Bcash, right? So now you have to understand, like, how committed are you to this? And this is me coming from a sense of acceptance of I'm not trying to change consensus. And this is the ordinal stuff is not breaking technical consensus of the code.
I know, but I think you're more likely to see a social campaign first.
Sure, but there's not enough demand there. Because the miners, like, you need more than just the users. You need the miners to cooperate with that. So then you need miners to act against their own interest and have lower transaction fees to make this work. Maybe you offset it by making a smaller block size. If there's a smaller block size, there's less space to get into the next block, so transaction fees go up. So maybe that offsets it.
But that would have to be a hard fork.
Would that have to be a hard fork?
It has to be a hard fork.
No, you can have users all opted and say...
I'm almost certain, because I discussed this with Luke Dasher, that 300, he wants 300k block sizes, and I'm pretty sure the only way you can do that is a hard fork.
Well, you could have all miners agree just not to publish blocks that are over 300 kilobytes. And then that's just like it's a user behavior. It's not actually changing any lines of code. If all of the miners agreed, hey, we're not going to make a block anymore that's over 300 kilobytes, you could do it, but you need all the miners to agree to it.
Yeah, I don't see that.
If you want to make it a rule, it has to be a fork.
Yeah, I just don't see that one happening.
I agree. And I'm coming from a place of acceptance that Casey put a lot of thought into the design of this to do it within the design space and rules of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And because of that, if you don't like it, you are the one that's changing the rules of Bitcoin. And this is where you're like when there's an application of like moral or social narratives on top of the technical code of Bitcoin, that's when you're like, well, is this good for the sound money thesis? And it's like, well, the sound money thesis is not literally in the code, as in this must be the primacy use case of Bitcoin. We apply narratives and say, well, there's certain characteristics of Bitcoin, the limited supply, the controlled issuance, the difficulty adjustment that benefited as sound money, but there's nothing in the code that says it must be sound money.
No, but like for some people, I imagine this is a really important point, like on a maybe ethical level for them.
Sure.
You know, when Rosa Parks sat at the back of the bus or the front of the bus, I can't remember what were the rules. Front of the bus.
Front of the bus.
Yeah, she broke the laws of society because. And when I bought cannabis oil for my mum, I broke the laws because I thought it was the right thing to do.
Right.
Some people may see this as like we're trying to bring sound money, and this might be a net negative.
But we're talking about the actual changing of the rules of the code. Like the Bitcoin blockchain works because we all agree on consensus.
Of course.
If you change consensus, that's a very scary place to be, and you will cause a fork if there's a disagreement. The only reason why we don't have forks in Bitcoin is like
but that's
splits.
Why I'm saying social campaign first.
Sure.
I'm saying all I'm saying is I don't think this is settled.
I think there's too much support from all of the miners, many of the users. There is a small subset of users right now who believe in the general world of Bitcoin that would want to actually have a fork, because a fork is putting your skin in the game, money on the table, saying, I am going to, after the fork happens, I'm going to sell the other fork's coins, right? So if you have ordinal free, ordinal disrespector, and ordinal respector, you have the base chain right now.
Oh, I think the ordinal one wins right now. But I think it's purely selfish.
Well, Bitcoin works because everyone has their own selfish motivations. No one's altruistically acting within Bitcoin, the code itself. We have agents like you who believe in things like, bringing better money to the developing world. But that's you individually. That's not the Bitcoin code doing that, right? And I think that's, this is just kind of the messy thing. It's rough consensus. It's messy. It's sloppy. And like, it's a very serious thing if you're going to change it. And I think Bitcoin works because everyone is selfishly motivated. If it required an altruistic lens, it would require external maintenance of like to keep it going, and the project would fail. Bitcoin works because everyone is selfish.
Hold on. I think we've got to where we are over 13, 14 years of Bitcoin because of altruism.
I mean, in what way?
I mean, a lot of people have had to make sacrifices to work and build Bitcoin, develop Bitcoin. I mean, anyone who took a job or worked on Bitcoin Core instead of taking a high paid salary at Google, that was an altruistic action to create better sound money.
I think people just find it as an interesting software project. They may not necessarily, they're not, I don't think people in like 2010 were like, I'm going to work on this to be able to get sound money to the world. They found it as an incredibly unique software project to work on. There may be some people who do that as well.
There is definitely altruistic work with the Bitcoin. When you make a donation to a developer, that's altruistic work.
Yeah. I donated to Luke Dasher, and those coins did not move until the day of his hack. They literally sat there in a UTXO, and then I heard he got hacked, and I went and looked at my old addresses.
I just think you're wrong saying there's no altruism in Bitcoin.
The code itself, the protocol moves forward without requiring altruism. The protocol exists because of greed. Miners are not mining out of the goodness of their heart. They may have business decisions and reasons where they may mine unprofitably for a certain period of time because they believe in a longer thesis of Bitcoin. But no one's like, that's not like the miners propagate an HNU block out of their own selfish interest because they're able to make a profit. I hold on to Bitcoin because I have a selfish belief that it's going to be worth more in the future and it's going to be able to help me provide for my family. We all and this is where like Bitcoin is an anarchic system. We each have our own senses and motivations, but it's all out of our own perception of what we want. There's no sort of ethical committee of Bitcoin saying, well, we haven't done enough, allocation of like, resources over here. We need to deploy stuff over here, right? There is no governing body that's deciding like the moral ethical code of how Bitcoin should work.